Maybe this has happened to you and you haven't told anyone. You're home. Everything is quiet. And for a second you'd swear you heard the sound of his paws on the floor. It was not a soft memory. It was almost real. As if he had passed through the hallway again, as if he still knew exactly where to find you, as if a part of him still lived between the walls where he loved you. And the strongest thing is not listening to it. The strongest thing is to feel deep down that maybe he didn't leave you completely. This video is to talk about that. To talk about that presence that many people feel after the departure of their dog, and that they almost always keep silent for fear that no one will understand them. But it is also to give you something more important: peace, meaning, and a new way of looking at that bond that changed your life. Because maybe the pain you feel doesn't just mean absence. Maybe it also means that there was a love so true, so loyal, and so deep, that not even death could completely extinguish it. If today you continue to miss him, if there are corners of your house that no longer feel the same, if you still look at the door out of habit, if sometimes you wonder why his memory is still so alive inside you, stay until the end. Because this video can help you understand why there are bonds that do not disappear when a body is gone. And it can help you look at your grief with less guilt, less confusion, and much more hope. We are not going to talk from the noise. We are going to talk about those small, everyday things that only those who truly loved a dog understand. The plate that no longer moves from place to place. The door where he was waiting for you. The space of the house that, since he left, seems to have a different feel. That strange habit of continuing to talk to him even if you no longer see him. And that intimate moment, so difficult to explain, in which you feel that their love did not end. It just changed form. Because anyone who had a dog knows that it was not just a pet. It was a presence, a routine with soul, a silent companion who knew when you were fine, when you were broken, and when you needed affection without saying a single word. Sometimes he would follow you around the house without making a sound. Sometimes he lay nearby, as if his only mission was to be with you. Sometimes a look from him was enough to feel that someone finally understood you. And when a bond like that touches your life, it doesn't disappear like ordinary things disappear. Leave a mark, leave an echo. It leaves marks in the memory, in the body, in the house, and many times also in the soul. Therefore, in this video we are going to explore together something that millions feel, but few know how to name. The possibility that your dog is still by your side, even right now, not in the way he used to wag his tail or run towards the door, but in a quieter, more subtle, and sometimes more profound way. Not to deny the loss, not to escape the pain, but to understand that true love does not always end when we believe. And perhaps, while listening to this video, you will begin to recognize things that have happened to you and that until today you had not known how to interpret. Maybe that feeling wasn't imagination. Maybe that memory that comes back again and again didn't come just because of sadness. Maybe that bond is still trying to speak to you in the only language the heart recognizes when it truly loves: presence. Tell me something inside you. Have you ever felt, even just for a second, that your dog is still close to you? Because if that happened to you, this video didn't come to you by chance. And what seems like a simple memory can be the beginning of something much deeper. There are things that seem small, until one day they are missing. And when they are missing, you realize that they were not small at all. They were part of your life. Those who have never shared their days with a dog may not fully understand this, but those who did experience it know that there was a constant presence in the most normal details of the day. There was no need for something big to happen. It was enough to walk from one room to another and notice that he was behind. It was enough to sit for a moment and watch him settle nearby, as if being with you was enough. It was enough to arrive home and feel that, for someone, your return was the most important moment of the day. That is not forgotten. Your dog was not alone in the special moments. It was in the most ordinary moments, in the simplest ones, in which no one records, no one publishes, no one applauds, but which are precisely the ones that end up living forever inside you. Maybe he followed you to the kitchen. Maybe he was waiting for you while you were doing something. Maybe you went to the bathroom, to the bedroom, to the door, and there he was, as if his way of loving was not to let you out of sight. And in that everyday gesture, there was something immense, because it wasn't just custom, it was bond, it was attachment, it was a silent way of telling you, I am with you. Therefore, when a dog leaves, what it hurts not just its physical absence, it also hurts to abruptly cut off all those habits that seemed invisible. Suddenly there are no footsteps behind you. There is no one waiting on the other side of the door anymore. You no longer feel that calm look, following your routine as if everything you do matters. And that's when the house changes. Not because objects are missing, but because there is a lack of a presence that filled everyday life with meaning. Many people say that the worst pain did not come the day their dog left. It came later, on normal days, at the moment of opening the door and not seeing him, at the exact second that, out of habit, they looked towards the place where he always lay, in that fraction of time in which the body is still looking for it before accepting that it is no longer the same as before. This happens because love also settles in reflections, in the memory of the body, in those routines that are created without asking permission. And when a bond was true, the absence is not felt only in the heart, it is felt in the most common movements of the day. A person once told something that sums this up very well. She said that for years, her dog always waited for her by the living room door when she returned from work. It didn't matter if I arrived early, late, tired, crying, or silent. He was there, sometimes wagging his tail, sometimes just looking at her with that calmness that only dogs who truly love have. After he left, she continued coming into the house the same as always. He put the key in, opened the door, and for several days, he turned his head towards the same place, automatically, without thinking about it, as if a part of her still believed she was going to see him there. And the hardest thing was discovering that, although the space was empty, the feeling of being expected had not completely disappeared. That confused him, but it also moved her, because he began to understand that some bonds leave such a deep mark that even when the body is no longer there, the experience of having been loved continues to live within you with real strength. Maybe something similar happened to you. Maybe there is still a time of day when your body seeks it out before your mind. Maybe you still feel that something in the house reminds you of the way you were. And that doesn't make you weak. That speaks to the depth of what they shared. There are those who think that grieving for a dog should be less, faster, and easier to overcome. But just think about this. How could someone who was with you through so many invisible fragments of life not hurt deeply? How could someone who turned everyday life into company not leave a huge void? Your dog knew your schedules, your moods, your silences, the way you walked when you were fine, and the way you moved when something inside you was not at peace. Many times, even before other people noticed your sadness, he already knew it. And it was getting closer. No speeches, no explanations, without asking for anything in return. He just stayed close. That is why the memory of a dog does not work like that of any other presence. It is not just an image in memory. It's a complete sensation, a mix of scenes, sounds, habits, and emotions that continue to appear in daily life. The sound of their paws, the place where he lay down, the way he reached out when he felt you needed him, the exact way he awaited your arrival, as if every return of yours was a celebration. If you have ever experienced that, then you know that this type of love is not easily explained. It is recognized, it feels, and it is carried inside long after the farewell. Write your dog's name in the comments if he was also one of those that followed you around the house, as if his favorite place in the world was simply being near you. Because what comes now touches one of the deepest parts of this experience, that strange silence that remains after your departure, and why sometimes that silence is not as empty as it seems. And this is where everything gets more difficult, because at first you think that the hardest thing will be saying goodbye, but not always. Sometimes the hardest thing comes later, when the movement ends, when the house returns to routine, when there are no veterinarians, no visits, no urgent decisions, no people asking how you are, when you are finally left alone with space and silence. That silence weighs in a different way. It doesn't make noise, but it presses. You can't see it, but it changes the air of the house. Suddenly, there are corners that seem intact and at the same time unrecognizable. The place where he slept is still there. Maybe his blanket is gone. Maybe his bed was moved. Maybe you kept his things because it hurt you to see them. Or maybe they are still exactly where they were, because removing them would be accepting something that inside you still cannot fully name. And that is also part of grieving, because losing a dog is not just missing someone. It is learning to walk through a house that no longer answers the same. Before there was a life accompanying your movements. A soft sound down the hall, a calm breath near the sofa, a body lying in that corner that already seemed to have an eternal owner. And then, one day, that place is still there, but it doesn't have the same heat anymore. That breaks inside in a very silent way. Maybe you pass by that space and look down without realizing it. Maybe you still avoid looking too much. Maybe, on the contrary, you always look as if a part of you keeps waiting to find it there. The strongest thing is that these things happen in common moments, not in big scenes. It happens when you wake up half asleep, when you turn off the light, when you leave something in the kitchen, when you come back from the street, when you sit down at the end of the day, and without thinking, your body registers that someone is missing. There appears the true size of the absence. Because grief does not live only in crying. He also lives in broken customs, in the hand that no longer comes down to caress, in the reflection of looking towards the ground, in the impulse to call his name even though you know that no one is going to run to you like before. And there is something that almost no one says, but many people feel. Sometimes the silence of the house does not seem completely empty. It looks loaded, as if it saved something, as if instead of erasing his presence, he had transformed it. That may disconcert you, because a part of you knows that he is no longer physically there, but another part feels that there is something of itself still accompanying the environment, not as an exaggerated idea, not like a forced fantasy, but as an intimate, simple sensation, difficult to explain, like entering a room and noticing that that corner still has something of its own. Like looking at the place where I slept and feeling that it's not just nostalgia. Like experiencing that sudden impression that the house learned its way of loving and still maintains it. Pause for a second. Not every emptiness is total absence. Sometimes love leaves a form of presence that is not seen, but is perceived. And that is why this silence hurts so much, because it is not just any silence. It is the silence that remains when someone who accompanied you in everything no longer takes up space with your body, but continues to take up space within your life. Many people try to fight against it. They force themselves not to look, not to remember, not to talk about him, not to mention how much they miss it, because they feel like it should have happened already. But love doesn't work with calendars, and neither does grieving for a dog. It is not measured by weeks. It is not resolved because someone from the outside tells you that it was just an animal. You don't become small because others don't understand. You live according to the depth of the bond. And when that bond was made of daily company, silent loyalty, and unconditional love, it is natural that the house takes time to feel like home again. Because he didn't just occupy one place, it occupied an atmosphere. It occupied an everyday energy. It was part of the emotional order of your days. That's why sometimes the corner where he slept seems almost sacred. Not because of the object itself, but because of everything it represents. Shared hours, difficult nights when he was close, simple mornings, afternoons of no apparent importance that today you remember as treasures. That small space ended up keeping something bigger than a habit. It kept a love story lived in repeated gestures. And when you pass by, you're not just remembering a place, you're remembering who you were when he was around. That is also so moving, because his departure not only changes the house, it also changes the way you live in it. There are people who even turn down the volume on everything without realizing it. They talk less. They walk differently. They leave closed doors that were previously left open. They avoid certain routines. Not because they want to dramatize the loss, but because the body understands before words that something essential is missing. However, in the midst of that pain, a very delicate truth begins to appear. Silence does not always come to erase. Sometimes it comes to reveal. Reveal how much it meant. Reveal how much company there was in the simple. Reveal that his love got so deep into your life that not even absence could tear it away. Therefore, when you feel that the house turned out strange, you are not exaggerating. The house was marked by its existence, and you too. Maybe on the outside, everything is still in its place. But inside, something learned to listen differently. You no longer search only with your eyes. You start searching with your memory, with your skin, with your heart. And there a new sensation is born. Very fragile, very human. The idea that perhaps he did not completely disappear, but remains in a different form, quieter, more subtle, but still close. That thought does not eliminate sadness, but you can start to make sense of it. It can help you understand why certain places continue to speak to you. ¿Por qué su rincón aún se siente especial? Why the silence he left is not a common void, but a kind of echo, an EC, or love. And that echo is important because it prepares the heart to look at one of the hardest moments of all in a different way. What was in his gaze, in his last days, in that farewell that perhaps was not as simple as it seemed? Because sometimes, just before leaving, a dog leaves something more than pain. It leaves a message that is only understood later. There is a memory that many people try to avoid for a long time, not because they have forgotten it, but because it still hurts the same. It is the memory of his last days, his last quiet afternoon, his last time in his corner, his way of breathing, the way he looked at you. That moment when, without knowing how to explain it, you felt that something was changing. Anyone who has been through that knows that there are goodbyes that are never erased. They are recorded with a strange clarity. Sometimes you remember the weather that day, the sound of the street, the light coming through the window, the exact place where you were. And above all, you remember his look. Because there are dog looks that accompany a lifetime. And there is one, the last one, that often remains beating inside one like an unanswered question. Maybe he looked at you in a different way. Quieter, deeper, longer. As if he wanted to say something and couldn't do it with words. As if he knew something that you still couldn't understand. And since then, every time you return to that memory, you silently ask yourself the same thing. What was in that look? It's not unusual for it to happen. Many people feel that, before leaving, their dogs seem to have a special awareness of that moment, not from something dramatic or strange, rather from a serenity that is difficult to explain, as if, in the midst of fatigue or pain, I continued to maintain a connection with you that went beyond the body, as if even in his fragility, he wanted to leave you something. Not a complete answer, but yes, a footprint. Because the last day together is almost never remembered just for what happened. It is remembered for what it felt like. It is remembered for that impossible mix between love, helplessness, tenderness, and pain. It is remembered for the feeling of wanting to stop time, for the desire to stay a little longer. Because of that need to memorize everything, even if at that moment you didn't even know you were doing it. Perhaps you remember stroking his head more carefully than ever, Maybe you remember repeating his name in a low voice. Maybe you remember that you told him things that no one else heard. Maybe you still feel the weight of that farewell in your chest, as if a part of you was still there. And that has a very human reason. When we truly love, the last moment does not remain only in memory. It becomes an inner place to which we return again and again. We return to understand. We return to search for meaning. We return because we feel that there was something more there than we understood at that moment. And many times, there was. Not always in the form of an obvious sign. Sometimes it was a way of looking at you, an unexpected calm, a way to stay close, a softness in the middle of the finish. There are people who say that their dog, in his last hours, did just what he had always done when he wanted to be at peace. Lie down nearby, search for his voice, rest his head where he felt safe. As if, even as he left, he chose once again the place where he had loved and felt loved. This is so moving because it breaks a very common idea, that of thinking that the game was only a loss. Yes, there was loss. Yes, there was pain. Yes, there was a breakup that broke something inside. But there could also have been a silent surrender, a last act of trust, a way of saying, I'm leaving, but I'm leaving from your love. And that changes a lot the way we look at that memory. Doesn't make it any less sad. But you can make it deeper. Because then, you no longer only see the moment you lost him, you begin to see the moment when the bond showed its purest form. Your dog didn't need to speak to tell you that he trusted you. He didn't need words to show you that he knew who you were to him. He didn't need to understand death the way humans understand it to leave you a farewell full of meaning. Sometimes his look was enough. And here is something that strikes a very intimate chord. Many people feel guilt when they remember the ending. They think they could have done more, that they should have noticed something before, that maybe they made a mistake, that they weren't there long enough, that they didn't say the right thing, that they didn't know how to protect him at all. The guilt appears because the love was enormous, but enormous love also distorts judgment when looking back, because it forces you to push yourself even in the midst of pain. And the truth is different. The truth is that if you were there with love, with care, with presence, you already gave him something immense. Maybe you couldn't change the outcome. Maybe you couldn't hold it. Maybe you couldn't avoid saying goodbye. But you could offer him what matters most in tea, that he was not alone in his final step. That's worth more than you imagine. For a dog who loved you, your closeness was no small detail. It was his world, your voice, your smell, your hand, your way of approaching. All of that was home to him. And if he left feeling any of that, then he didn't leave from abandonment. He left from the link. And that difference matters. It matters because maybe you've been looking at that last memory for a long time only from the wound, when you could also start looking at it from the depth of the bond you built together. Ask yourself this question inside. What if that last look was not just goodbye, but also a way to stay with you in another way? That possibility does not erase the tears, but it opens a door. Because perhaps what moves you so much about that memory is not just the end. Maybe it's that, in that moment, you perceived something that your mind couldn't translate, but your heart did keep, that there was love even there, at the very edge of the game. And that's why that scene comes back so much. Because it was not an empty moment. It was a full moment, full of meaning, full of delivery, filled with a kind of connection that is not easily broken. Sometimes, with the passage of time, one begins to notice that what remains most from the last day is not the illness, nor the fear, nor the harsh image of goodbye. What remains most is something else. The way he looked for you, the way he rested with you close, that strange peace that appeared for seconds, that feeling that something very big was happening in silence. And there a different understanding begins to emerge. Maybe the departure wasn't just a brutal cut. Maybe it was a step. Painful, yes. Incomprehensible, many times too. But one step, a change of state in the link, not necessarily its total destruction. That idea is not understood from cold logic. It is understood from the human experience of those who have loved a dog so much that they feel that something about them is still alive beyond the last day. And just before we get into that, in the deepest part of this journey, it's worth saying clearly, you are not inventing the weight of that look, nor exaggerating the impact of that farewell. When a dog truly loves, he leaves marks that do not end with the last caress. Leave something that continues to work inside you. And sometimes, a long time later, you understand that that last day wasn't just the day he left. It was also the day when it began to linger in a way that you still didn't know how to recognize. Because there are bonds so loyal, so clean, and so deep that they are not broken when the body falls into silence. They only change shape. And that is the revelation that can transform everything you have felt until now. And here we come to the most delicate part of all, because after the pain, the silence, the last memory, an idea appears that for many people is scary to even think about. Not because it's obscure, but because it's too important. Because if it were true, it would completely change the way we look at everything we experienced. The idea is this. Maybe your dog hasn't left your life. Maybe he just stopped being with you in the way your eyes could recognize. That is very different. Because it's one thing to lose a presence, and another thing is that that presence changes its way. Many times when we talk about the departure of a dog, everything is reduced to the physical. He doesn't run anymore. He doesn't bark anymore. He no longer wags his tail. He no longer takes his place in the house. And of course that hurts. It hurts a lot. But the deepest bond was never made just of movements, sounds, and habits. All of that was beautiful, yes. But what really made that relationship unforgettable was something else. It was the connection. The way he read you without words. The way he came to you just when you needed him most. That peace that he gave you without asking anything. That clean love, without calculation, without distance, without condition. And when a bond is made of that material, it is hard to believe that it can disappear completely from one moment to the next. Not because we want to deceive ourselves, but because in the most human thing we have, we feel that true love leaves continuity. Think about this in a simple way. There are people who pass through our lives and, even after they leave, they barely leave a blurry image. But there are other presences that continue to act within us long afterward. Our decisions change. Our habits change. They change the way we remember, the way we feel, the way we inhabit the world. They are not in front of us as before, but they continue to influence, accompany, mark. With a dog, something even deeper can happen, because his love was not full of words that are forgotten. It was made of repeated acts, pure company, of a daily loyalty that entered your soul without asking permission. And that is why his absence does not behave like a common absence. That's why there are days when you don't just remember it. You feel it. You feel it when something inside you falls LMA when thinking about him. You feel it when a part of your house still seems to know its energy. You feel it when you talk about him, and it doesn't seem like a closed story, but rather a bond that continues to breathe within you. Here is the central reveal of this video. The purest bonds don't always end. Sometimes they just become invisible. That's the kind of phrase you don't really understand with your head. It is understood with life. It is understood when a memory weighs not only as sadness, but as presence. It's understandable when the love you feel for him doesn't seem like something from the past, but something that is still happening inside you right now. It's understandable when you discover that missing him so much doesn't just mean that he's gone, but also that his mark is still alive with real strength. And here it is important to say something very clearly. This is not about denying death or inventing empty consolations. It is about recognizing that there are relationships that touch such deep layers of the being that they cannot be explained only with the visible. Your dog wasn't important just because he was there. It was important because of what it awakened in you. Your tenderness, your sense of care, your emotional routine, your way of feeling accompanied, your way of loving in silence. And when a presence awakens all of that, it doesn't completely disappear when the body is no longer there. It remains otherwise. In memory, yes. In customs, too. But sometimes even beyond that, like a kind of inner company that continues to support you without making a sound. That is why there are people who, in their most difficult moments, feel their dog again with an unexpected intensity. Not necessarily as a vision, not necessarily as something extraordinary. Sometimes it is something much simpler and stronger at the same time. A sudden calm, a feeling of closeness, the impulse to look towards a specific place, the impression of not being completely alone. That strange second when your heart goes limp, as if a part of that old loyalty has come to touch you again. Many try to explain it as simple habit, and sometimes custom influences, of course. But there are human experiences that cannot be completely reduced. There are bonds that remain alive not because the mind made them, but because the love that created them was too deep to be broken cleanly and definitively. Your dog didn't share just one stage with you, shared a part of your everyday soul. He was in your simple days, on your happy days, in your invisible routines, and also, many times, on your most broken days. He saw you cry without understanding the reason, but staying. He saw you remain silent and approached. He saw you fall, and in his own way, stood guard next to your pain. That's not small. That is not replaceable. That's not just any coincidence. There are links that seem made to teach us something about fidelity, about presence, about the purest form of love. And sometimes the dog enters a person's life with exactly that mission. To remind them that they can be loved in a total way, even on their darkest days. That's why his departure is so messy. Because you don't just feel like you lost company. You feel like something sacred touched your life, and then became invisible. But invisible does not mean non-existent. That is the point that can change everything. The invisible also accompanies. The invisible also leaves signs. The invisible also sustains, although in a more silent way. And perhaps that is why there are people who, after a long time, stop asking only, "Why did he leave?" And they begin to ask themselves something deeper. How is he still here? That change of question transforms the duel. It doesn't delete it. It doesn't make it easy, but it transforms it. Because instead of just looking at the whole, you start looking at the trail. Instead of being left with only the loss, you begin to perceive continuity. Instead of thinking that everything is over, you begin to notice that something continues to beat at another frequency, in another language, in another form. And that language is usually silent. It doesn't come with explanations. It comes with small, internal recognitions. With that corner of the house that still moves. With that custom that is still alive. With that immediate tenderness when pronouncing his name. With that love intact that did not degrade over time, but sometimes seems to have grown deeper. That says something too. He says the bond was not superficial. He says that it was not built only on the visible. He says there was a much greater emotional and spiritual union than perhaps you understood while he was here with you physically. And when one understands that, a new peace appears. Not complete peace, not a perfect peace, but enough peace to breathe differently. The peace of thinking that maybe you didn't completely lose it. The peace of feeling that your love was not locked in the past. The peace of allowing yourself to believe that some loyalties don't end at the last breath. Maybe P. That's why there are still moments when you feel him close. Maybe that's why certain memories don't feel closed. Maybe that's why, even if months or years pass, you continue to perceive that something was left open between you and him, not just as a wound, but as a bridge. And here is the most beautiful truth of all. When a dog truly loved you, he didn't just leave memories in your life. He left a form of presence that time cannot erase. Stay for a second with that phrase. Because he doesn't just talk about the past. Talk about now. Talk about this moment, from that part of you that still recognizes it, of that love that did not extinguish, of that connection that, even crossed by sadness, remains alive. And that takes us to the next step, perhaps the most intimate of all, recognizing how that closeness manifests itself in everyday life, in small signs, in simple sensations that many people have experienced, and that perhaps you have also felt without daring to name them. After understanding that such a bond does not simply disappear, a very intimate question arises. Not a question to discuss with anyone. A question that appears in a low voice, almost like an internal confession. If he's really still around, how can you tell? And the answer almost never comes in a spectacular way. It comes in the small, in everyday life, in those moments that seem minimal, but that leave you with an emotion that is difficult to explain. Because when a dog is still present in a subtle way, it doesn't usually appear in big scenes. It is usually felt in details that directly touch the memory, the body, and the heart. Sometimes it is a sudden sensation when entering the house. Sometimes it is the impulse to look towards the place where he always slept. Sometimes it's a strange calm on a heavy day, as if something familiar has brushed your soul for a second. It's not about forcing signals. It is about recognizing that there are human experiences that, although simple, leave a very deep emotional truth. For example, there are people who say that on the most difficult days, just when the pain hits hardest, they feel the need to talk to you again. And as they do, something inside them falls into place. Not because the grief disappears, but because for a moment the loneliness weighs less, as if the bond responded not with words, but with inner company. Other people say that, for a very specific moment, they feel the same routine again. They open the door, and the heart leaps forward. They walk around the house, and for a second they don't feel alone. They hear any sound, and the memory not only hurts, it also embraces. It is as if the presence left by their pause, their habits, their way of loving, continues to travel through certain spaces. That may seem small, but it is not, because true love always leaves a form of continuity in everyday life. A woman told something that greatly affected those who listened to her. He said he had spent weeks on end feeling the house was too still since his dog left. One night, after a particularly hard day, she sat on the floor, right next to where he slept. He didn't do anything extraordinary. He didn't ask for a sign. He didn't try to convince himself of anything. He just stayed there, in silence, with open sadness. And suddenly, she felt the same peace she had felt so many times when he lay nearby. He didn't see it. He didn't hear anything strange. But the anguish suddenly subsided, as if an ancient company had returned to support her inside. She said something very simple. "I don't know how to explain it, but I felt like I wasn't crying alone." That's what makes these experiences so profound. They do not oblige. They don't make a show. They only leave a soft certainty. The certainty that the bond can continue to touch your life in discreet ways, but real to the heart. Maybe something similar has happened to you. Maybe there was a day when you thought about him so strongly that you didn't just feel sadness. You felt closeness. Maybe some routine brought it back to you for a moment, not as a wound, but as company. Maybe you said his name, and instead of breaking you further, you felt a quiet tenderness, as if that name still had warmth. That matters too, because not everything that remains manifests with intensity. Sometimes it remains as a consolation, as living memory, like a presence that does not push, does not interrupt, does not demand, but accompanies. Do this for a moment within yourself. Remember a recent day when you were unwell, tired, or emotionally empty. Think if, for a second, something of his didn't appear. An image, a sensation, a habit, a form of calm. Many times, that is where it is most noticeable that certain ties are still active. Not when everything is fine, but when you need the kind of love he gave you again. And that makes a lot of sense. Because the dogs they truly loved didn't just share moments with you. They learned your states of soul. They learned your energy. They learned when you needed closeness, even if you didn't say anything. And for that reason, even after his departure, there are people who feel that his memory appears most strongly, precisely at the moments when they need the most emotional support. Not as a coincidence, but as an echo of a loyalty that did not learn to abandon you. Write in the comments, "Stay with me," if you've ever felt that kind of silent presence after your dog left. Because when many people discover that they are not the only ones to experience something like this, the pain changes shape. It is no longer experienced as something strange or impossible to tell. It is lived as part of a love so deep that it continues to find ways to be. And here, it's worth saying something important. You don't need to prove anything to honor what you feel. You don't need to turn it into theory. You don't need to defend it in front of anyone. There are experiences that were not made to be demonstrated, but to be understood by those who lived them. If your heart recognizes that sometimes his love still reaches you, that already has value. If certain places in the house continue to feel inhabited by your living memory, that already means something. If there are moments when sadness is mixed with a peace that is difficult to explain, don't dismiss it so quickly. Sometimes, in the simplest language of the soul, that is companionship too. And perhaps the most beautiful thing of all is this. Those silent signs do not come to open the wound further, but to remind you that the bond was not lost in a vacuum. They come to tell you that what they built together was so real, so clean, and so loyal, that it still leaves warmth even after the physical absence. They don't come back to confuse you. They come back to sustain you, to help you understand that the love he left in you was not a finished episode, but a living mark. And that brand is noticeable in very specific things. How you keep talking to him sometimes, how his name still lights up something inside you, in how certain memories, instead of fading, become deeper, in how a part of your heart continues to make room for him, not like a wound forcibly closed, but like a beloved presence. All of this brings us to the final leg of this journey. Because when you start looking like that, you understand something enormous. Maybe he never left that everything he built with you. Maybe you're still exactly where you always wanted to be. Near, in silence, faithful. And what comes now is just that. Go back to the beginning. Go back to that memory that seemed like only pain. And discover that perhaps it was always holding a much greater meaning. Go back to the beginning for a moment. At that strange moment when you were at home, everything seemed silent. And for a second, you felt that his paws were still crossing the hallway. At first, that memory seemed to speak only of absence. He seemed to speak only of nostalgia. It seemed like one of those wounds that open when memory touches what hurts the most. But now, after everything we went through together, that scene may have another meaning. Maybe it wasn't just sadness. Maybe it was bond. Maybe it wasn't just your mind repeating a habit. Maybe it was your heart recognizing that there are loves that don't know how to leave at all. Because when a dog truly loved, he wasn't with you just to fill a stage. He was with you to mark a deep part of your life. It was in your routine, in your common days, in your silences, in your broken moments, in that version of you that perhaps not even other people got to know. And when a presence enters so deeply, it does not disappear simply because it is no longer seen. Leave an echo. Leave heat. He leaves a fidelity that continues to breathe within what you were with him and within what you still are. Maybe that's why you keep looking, sometimes without thinking, towards the place where he slept. Maybe that's why you still feel something special near the door where I was waiting for you. Maybe that's why the imaginary sound of its paws doesn't feel like just any illusion, but rather like a living memory that insists on reminding you of something, that he was, that he loved, that he left a part of himself in your world. And perhaps the most beautiful truth is not to think that he left, and that's it. Perhaps the deepest truth is understanding that he is still with you in a different way, not to replace your physical absence, not to erase the grief, not to make you deny what hurt, but to show you that the bond did not end at the moment of goodbye. It just changed shape. It became quieter, more interior, harder to explain, but also, in a certain sense, broader. Because now he no longer lives alone in a corner of the house. Now he lives in your memory, in your habits, in your way of loving, in the way you remember what loyalty means, in the tenderness that awakens in you when you say his name, in the way you still feel that a part of you belongs to him. That's no small feat. That is permanence. That's footprint. That is a form of continuity that not even time can completely erase. And here's the great consolation of this video. Maybe you're not holding on to the past, as you sometimes think. Maybe you are perceiving a truth that the pain took a while to let you see. Maybe that feeling of closeness isn't weakness. Perhaps it is intimate proof that some bonds are greater than a single life shared in body. There are dogs that pass through this world as if they were carrying a silent mission. Take care of yourself. Accompany you. Wait for you. Teach you love without speech. Show you that the purest presence does not need words. And when one of those dogs comes into your life, something changes forever. Not only because of the happiness it brings, also for the spiritual mark it leaves. Therefore, although the house was silent, it was not completely empty. Although his bed no longer has his body, it has not completely lost its meaning. Although the door no longer shows him waiting for you like before, something in you still feels that you were loved when you returned. And that's real. Real for the soul. Real for memory. Real to that deep part of you that still moves when you think of him. Write in the comments, "My dog is still with me," if deep down you feel that this bond did not end with his departure. Because saying it also heals. Saying it also unites. Saying it also reminds other people that they are not alone in feeling this. And perhaps that is one of the greatest gifts they leave behind. Even after they leave, they continue to create love, community, and understanding among those who love them. So the next time you feel that special silence at home, the next time you look at your corner, the next time you, for a second, swear you felt his presence nearby, don't run to turn it off. Stay there for a moment, breathe, and allow that memory to tell you something new. Maybe you're not just hearing what you lost. Maybe you are hearing what still remains. Because the sound of its pause, the one that seemed to come only from memory, perhaps it was always trying to tell you the same thing. That the love they shared was no coincidence. That his passage through your life did not end in saying goodbye, and that the place where he most wanted to stay. It was never a bed, not a door, not a corner of the house. It was with you.